All right, guys, we're gonna make mini sketches, one for each region of Virginia, and I'm gonna start by taking that straight edge and lining it up with the top of my paper. Then I'm gonna trace that line and lift up my straight edge. I'm gonna put my straight edge on the line and make a line beneath. I'm gonna repeat that 4 times. By dividing my paper with 4 lines, I'm actually creating 5 spaces. And then I'm going to devote each of these spaces to a region of Virginia. I'm gonna write an abbreviation. BR stands for Blue Ridge. CP for Coastal Plains. AP, Appalachian Plateau. P is Piedmont, and I am missing one, and it's Valley and Ridge. And I'm gonna do a little sketch inside each of these areas that represents the region. I'm gonna think about the physical features of that area and how I could represent that in a piece of art. You have a worksheet that has images of the different regions of Virginia. You can be inspired by one of these. So for example, in the Blue Ridge, I'm gonna make a large tree in the front, and I'm gonna make some mountains. You can create your own details. I want you to think of the economies, so things like recreation. So maybe I'll make a river going through the Blue Ridge to represent that canoeing and other types of outdoor recreation, which is a way that money is made in the Blue Ridge region. I'm making some trees. They're smaller in the background. You can see that river I just drew follows that same principle. Big in the front, small in the back. And I'm gonna keep working like that until I have a little sketch of each of the areas. So for Coastal Plains, I would maybe be inspired by this image, or maybe I'd come up with my own. There's really no right or wrong way. I think I'll make a little sailboat, some waves, could make a little dolphin jumping up in the background, but I'm gonna keep working like that until every area is full. All right, now I have a drawing of each part of Virginia, and they're not super detailed. They're just really basic sketches, but I'm gonna pick which one I like the best. I think I'd actually like to paint the Piedmont region, and this is my inspiration. I will be making some changes though as I work on my good paper because it's a lot bigger and I'll have more space. So I'm gonna start by looking through some of these illusions or tricks that I can use to make my paper look deep, and just looking at some pictures of the Piedmont region. So I'm gonna start by making a barn. This barn is in the foreground or the front of my paper, so it's going to be relatively large. I can make a little fence next to it. Maybe there's a silo. A silo is kind of shaped like an upside down U. I'll make some marks on it to show where the metal is connected and maybe even give it some texture, okay? Now this is in the foreground. It's the big stuff. I'm gonna make a ground line or horizon line that represents a hilly area. I can give my paper some texture by adding little grass lines. And then I'm gonna make another ground line. This is the middle ground in my paper. Things in the middle ground are more medium size. So I am making a farm, but I'm gonna make it slightly smaller. I'll make maybe a fence going on either side of this farm just to make it look a little different. And I'm gonna make some evergreen trees. My evergreen trees are fairly small. They're actually a little bit bigger than the barn because I made them up closer in my middle ground area. The barn is behind it. If there were some back here behind the barn, they would be even smaller. And then I'm gonna make a few more hilly areas. This overlapping is really doing a good job making my paper look deep. I'm making another barn here. It's fairly small because it's in the background. Giving it a little fence. I'm gonna make the fence get smaller because it's moving back in space. Maybe I'll make a few trees here. And I'm almost done sketching. I'm gonna make these ones fairly close together. And I think I'll make sort of like a sunset happening in the background, so I'm just outlining the sun and a few clouds. Now this is just the basics of my art. I'm gonna add a lot more detail when I get to paint. I'm gonna show you a few painting techniques to get you started on your piece. The first one is going to be something called atmospheric perspective. The idea of atmospheric perspective is that brighter, more vibrant colors are in the foreground. This is the foreground of my paper, so I'm gonna use this kind of brighter green. I'll rinse my brush before I switch colors. Then I'm going to gradually fade as I move back. So I'm using that same green, rinse, and I'm going to add a little bit of the darker green into it. I'm not going to fill the whole area because it would actually take too long. I'll do that when I time lapse. Now I'm adding just a tiny bit of that light green and mostly dark green. So it's like my color is getting darker as you move back. That's a trick your eye plays on you. Obviously, the grass doesn't change colors further back in space, but your eye perceives it that way. It perceives it as darkening and becoming less vibrant. So that's one technique you can use to create depth. I'm going to make some grass lines on mine. I'm going to grab a different color green. The grass lines in the front, I'm going to make larger. This is just giving my paper texture. Texture is an element of art and it really adds interest. So in the back, I'm literally just like tapping. I'm not doing lines like I did in the foreground because it's very far away. And those could even represent trees or just the texture of the grass. Another technique you might like to try is scrape to reveal. So I'm gonna fill an area and maybe I want this barn to look like it has planks like wood. I can draw lines in it to give it that texture. Another thing I can do is blending colors. If I plan on blending colors, I need to make sure I have a good understanding of the color wheel. So they either need to be colors in the same family, like I did with the greens. Green and green look good together because they're both green. Or you need to use colors that are similar. So I'm gonna do pink and red. Pink is actually just light red. Then I'm gonna blend a little orange next to it. Red and orange are next door neighbors on the color wheel. So they look good mixed and blended together. If you would like to blend two colors and you are not sure if they'll look good together, just go ahead and ask me. I'm happy to tell you whether or not it'll work. So for example, red and green look really, really bad when you mix them together. So you would not want to mix those colors. And I'm gonna keep working like that until my paper is full of details using those techniques to add all kinds of color and detail to my paper. I'll time lapse you so you can see my work. All right, now my work is about done. You can see I've used a lot of different techniques. I used big in the foreground, small in the back. I used brighter, lighter colors in the foreground, darker in the back. I used more detail in the foreground, less detail in the back. I've created texture for my grass areas. I've blended colors. I've scraped away paint. There's a lot happening here, and I think it really represents the Piedmont well.